All right, so we're diving into ISO standards in healthcare today. Might sound a little dry, but stick with us. This is about making healthcare better for everybody, safer, more efficient. And we've got a whole stack of ISO publications and handbooks here, ready to break down how these standards are actually transforming patient care and, making healthcare organizations run smoother.
Yeah, it's really interesting how these ISO standards act as a blueprint for quality and not just in healthcare. They're used across so many different industries.
Okay, so for anyone listening who might not be super familiar with this, what exactly are we talking about when we say ISO standards?
Well, think of them as a set of best practices that experts from all over the world have agreed on. They're developed through the International Organization for Standardization.
So it's not just like one country's regulations, it's a global agreement on what good healthcare should look like.
Exactly. And that's really important because healthcare is facing more and more complex challenges all the time. We're talking patient safety complex procedures. And then this need for consistent quality no matter where you go.
So how do these standards actually help healthcare organizations, tackle all of those challenges?
Well, they provide a framework, a systematic way of approaching things to manage risks, streamline processes, and make sure that every part of your care, from a simple blood test to a complex surgery, is meeting those rigorous quality standards.
Okay, that makes sense. So what are some of the key ISO standards that we actually see in action in healthcare?
One of the really important ones is ISO 13485.20016. It's like the gold standard for medical device manufacturers. And you think about medical devices, they need to be incredibly reliable. This standard lays out a quality management system that's specifically designed to ensure that reliability from the initial design all the way to the moment a device is used.
So it's like a roadmap for building quality and safety into every step of a medical device owned journey.
Exactly. And it's not just about the device itself. It also covers things like risk management and making sure there's a consistent process throughout that whole life cycle, from development to manufacturing to what happens after it's on the market.
So creating a system to minimize risks and ensure these medical devices are as safe and effective as they can be.
Exactly, but ISO standards aren't just for device manufacturers. There's also ISO 7101.2023. And that one has a broader focus. It provides a framework for quality management systems in all different kinds of healthcare organizations, from a huge hospital to a small local clinic.
So it's like a universal set of quality guidelines for healthcare as a whole.
Yeah, you could say that it covers a lot of different areas, from operational planning and control to patient experience. They actually even use the term service user in this standard to emphasize that healthcare is ultimately a service provided to individuals.
I like that it reminds us that we're not just talking about systems here, we're talking about people's lives and experiences.
Exactly, and when we talk about people's lives, we can't forget about risk management, and that's where ISO 14971.2019 comes in.
Right, that one focuses on risk management principles, specifically for medical devices.
That's it. It guides manufacturers in identifying potential hazards and then putting the right controls in place to ensure patient safety. It's a multi-step process that starts with identifying what could go wrong.
So for example, like an electric scalpel malfunctioning during surgery.
That's a good one, yeah. They would then figure out how likely that is to happen and how bad the consequences would be if it did. A small cut from a scalpel is one thing, but a software glitch in a life support machine, that's a whole different level of risk.
Makes sense. So they're not just identifying hazards, they're actually figuring out the level of risk involved.
Exactly. And based on that assessment, they figure out what needs to be done to minimize those risks. It could be design changes, safety features, warning labels, or even specific training for the healthcare professionals who are using that device.
So a really comprehensive approach to safety built into every stage.
It is, and that's just one example of how ISO standards are used in healthcare. They cover so many aspects of quality management, and at the core of all of that is the concept of a quality management system, or QMS.
Okay, let's break that down. What is a QMS?
Think of it as a system that documents everything, all the processes, procedures, responsibilities within a healthcare organization. It's about having a clear framework for achieving your quality objectives.
So like a roadmap for ensuring consistent quality across the board.
Precisely, it's not just ticking boxes and meeting the bare minimum. It's about establishing a culture of quality, where everyone is striving for excellence in everything they do.
Makes sense, but could you give me an example of what that might actually look like in a hospital setting?
Sure. Imagine a hospital where every process, from the moment a patient is admitted to how medications are administered, is carefully documented and standardized, based on the best practices available. That minimizes errors, but it also builds trust. Patients know they're going to receive a consistent standard of care, no matter who's on duty.
That's a powerful example. Sounds like the QMS plays a huge role in achieving that.
It does, and those specific ISO standards we've been talking about, they're the building blocks for creating a really strong and effective QMS. It's like having a detailed instruction manual for building a high-performing healthcare organization.
Right, I started to see how all these pieces fit together. But let's get back to the practical benefits for us, the patients. How do we actually experience the impact of these ISO standards and quality management systems?
Think about it this way. When an organization has a strong QMS, you, the patient, are going to have a more consistent and reliable experience. You can feel more confident that the care you're receiving is going to meet those high standards, no matter which doctor, nurse, or technician you're interacting with.
So it's about reducing that variability, making sure everyone's working from the same playbook.
That's it, and that consistency leads to better outcomes for patients. And it also encourages this idea of continuous improvement. The organization is constantly looking for ways to do things even better.
So it's not just about meeting a standard, it's about always exceeding it.
Exactly, and that dedication to quality benefits everyone.
Okay, this is making me feel a lot more confident about the future of healthcare. But before we get too carried away, let's look at some specific examples of how these ISO standards are actually being applied in different areas of healthcare. I'm particularly curious about medical device manufacturing. How do these standards translate into real improvements in the way those devices are designed and developed?
That's a great question, and that's where ISO 13485.2016 really shines. One of the key things it requires is a strong focus on what they call design and development controls. So manufacturers need a plan for identifying and managing risks from the very beginning, from the moment a device is just an idea.
So it's not just about adding safety features at the end, it's about building safety into the design from day one.
You got it. And documentation is really important here. Every decision, every test result, every change made to the design, all of that has to be documented meticulously. So you have this clear trail of how the device evolved and how they addressed potential risks along the way.
It's like having a forensic investigation for medical devices, tracing every step of the process.
That's a great analogy. And all that documentation isn't just for looking back. It's about learning from any mistakes and making sure that if any issues come up, they can be thoroughly investigated to prevent similar problems in the future.
So using information to proactively improve things going forward.
Exactly. And that's a perfect example of how ISO standards embrace this idea of continuous improvement, which, as we've said, is really at the heart of building a stronger and safer healthcare system.
This is all fascinating stuff, but I want to switch gears for a minute and talk about medical laboratories. I know from personal experience how important accurate lab results are for getting the right diagnosis and treatment. How do ISO standards help ensure those results are reliable and accurate?
Well, there's actually a specific standard for that, ISO 15189. It focuses on quality and competence in medical laboratories. It's about setting a high bar for how these labs operate, and it covers everything from the expertise of the staff and the calibration of the equipment to how samples are handled and results are reported.
So a comprehensive approach to minimizing errors at every step.
Precisely. And again, this standard emphasizes continuous improvement. Labs have to regularly evaluate their processes and be proactive about identifying areas where they can do even better.
That's reassuring to know. It means labs are actively looking for ways to improve and be as accurate as possible.
It's all about creating a culture of quality where everyone in that lab is dedicated to providing the best service possible, which means better healthcare for you.
This is all incredibly insightful. But let's be real, even with the best systems, mistakes can still happen. So how do ISO standards deal with that? Those inevitable nonconformities or complaints?
That's where the idea of corrective and preventive actions comes in, or CAPA. It's a key part of a strong QMS, designed to address those deviations from requirements and prevent them from happening again.
So not just fixing the immediate problem, but understanding why it happened and stopping it from happening again.
Exactly when a nonconformity occurs, ISO standards require a thorough investigation to figure out the root cause. Then you take corrective actions to fix the problem, and preventive actions to address any systemic issues that might have contributed.
So a cyclical process of identifying, analyzing, and improving.
Exactly. And this approach isn't just for medical devices or labs. It applies across the board to any area where you're implementing ISO standards in healthcare.
Okay, that's really reassuring to know. So organizations are constantly learning and evolving to provide safer and more effective care. But healthcare isn't just about processes and systems, it's about people. How do ISO standards address that vital human element?
That's a great point. And ISO standards do a great job of recognizing the importance of stakeholder engagement. They encourage organizations to think beyond just a top-down approach and actively involve everyone who has a stake in the healthcare system, patients, providers, suppliers, even the wider community.
So creating a system that works for everyone, not just a select few.
Exactly. And ISO standards provide a framework for facilitating that kind of collaboration and open communication, which is really essential for building a patient-centered healthcare system.
This has been such an eye-opening look at the world of ISO standards in healthcare. We've explored how they're transforming patient care and operational efficiency in so many areas, from medical device manufacturing to medical laboratories. And it's clear that these standards aren't just dry guidelines. They're powerful tools for creating a safer, more reliable, and patient-focused healthcare system. But I'm sure there's still so much more to unpack. As we continue exploring this fascinating world, what else can our listeners look forward to as we dive deeper into this topic?
Oh, there's a lot more to cover. We'll be looking at the crucial role of documentation, the importance of transparency and accountability, and how ISO standards are really empowering healthcare professionals to deliver the best possible care.
This is all so exciting, but for now, we'll take a break and come back in the next part of our deep dive to explore those aspects in more detail.
You know, one thing that really stands out as we dig into these ISO publications and handbooks is the emphasis on documentation and record keeping.
Yeah, okay, I'll admit paperwork isn't the most exciting topic, but I'm starting to get why it's so crucial in healthcare.
It's not just about bureaucracy. You know, detailed documentation is essential for proving you're meeting regulations, but it also creates a system of accountability and traceability. It's like a breadcrumb trail. You can track every step of a process and verify what happened.
So if there's an issue, you can retrace those steps and see what happened. Who was involved where things might have gone wrong?
Exactly, and that's vital for learning from those situations and preventing them from happening again. Imagine a medical device malfunctions. With good documentation, investigators can trace that device back to its manufacturing batch. They can see the specific components that were used, even pinpoint the exact manufacturing conditions.
It's like having a detective on the case piecing together the evidence. That level of detail is amazing.
It is, and it's not about blaming anyone. It's about identifying those systemic issues, seeing patterns, and making improvements that benefit everyone.
So not just looking backward, but using that information to move forward.
Exactly, and that's a great illustration of continuous improvement, which is a core concept in all these ISO standards.
I'm seeing how all these elements connect: the standards, the quality management systems, the documentation, the drive for improvement. It's about building a culture of quality and safety at every level of healthcare.
And that culture relies on trust and transparency. When you as a patient see that commitment, it builds confidence in your healthcare providers.
Which is essential for good healthcare, right? Patients need to feel comfortable sharing information, asking questions, being a part of their own care.
Absolutely. And what's interesting is that ISO standards can actually help with that.
Really? How so?
Well, for example, ISO 7101.2023 specifically talks about engaging with people who use healthcare services. It encourages organizations to actually seek feedback from patients, understand their experiences, and use that to make improvements.
So it's more than just sending out satisfaction surveys. It's about truly listening to patients and understanding their needs.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that patients aren't just passive recipients of care, they're active participants in their healthcare journey.
And when patients feel heard and valued, they're more likely to be engaged in their care, which can lead to better outcomes.
It's a positive feedback loop, and ISO standards help create the conditions for that.
These insights are really fascinating. I'm seeing ISO standards in a whole new light. They seem pretty comprehensive, covering risk management, documentation, stakeholder engagement. Is there anything they don't address?
That's a great question. ISO standards offer a really solid framework for quality and safety, but they're not meant to be a one-size-fits-all solution. They provide guidelines, but each organization has to interpret them and implement them in a way that makes sense for their specific context.
So there's room for flexibility and customization.
Absolutely. The standards encourage organizations to consider their situation, their patients' local regulations, their internal culture, when developing their quality management systems.
Makes sense. Healthcare is so diverse. There's no way one set of rules could cover every scenario.
Exactly, and that's where the expertise of healthcare professionals is so important. They're the ones who translate these standards into real actions that improve patient care.
So it's a partnership between the standards and the people who use them.
Precisely, the standards provide the framework, but the people bring it to life.
Okay, I'm starting to feel like I could pass an ISO standards quiz. But before we get ahead of ourselves, I want to get back to the practical application of these standards. Specifically in medical device manufacturing, we talked about risk management earlier, but what are some of the actual ways manufacturers control those risks throughout a device's entire life cycle?
There are a lot of different strategies, and the approach depends on the device and the risks involved. But some common methods include designing for inherent safety, incorporating protective measures, providing clear safety information and warnings, and acknowledging any residual risks.
Let's break those down. What does designing for inherent safety mean?
It means eliminating the hazard altogether from the very beginning. For example, if a device uses electricity, you might design it with multiple layers of insulation and safety features to prevent electric shock.
So eliminating the risk at the source, rather than relying on warnings or external safeguards.
Exactly. That's always the best approach, if possible. But sometimes you can't completely eliminate hazards. That's where protective measures come in.
Like safety guards on machinery.
Precisely. Or alarms that sound if a device malfunctions. Or automatic shut-off mechanisms that prevent it from operating outside safe parameters.
So containing the hazard and preventing it from causing harm.
Right. And then there's safety information and warnings. Those are crucial for telling users about potential hazards and giving them clear instructions on how to use the device safely.
Like those detailed instruction manuals that come with medical devices, or the warning labels on prescription medication.
Exactly. They give users the knowledge they need to minimize risks, but sometimes, even with all these precautions, some level of risk might remain.
So what happens then?
That's where we have residual risk. It's the risk that's left even after you've done everything reasonable to control it.
So it's like an acceptable level of risk given the benefits the device provides.
Right, and manufacturers have to be upfront about any significant residual risks so users can make informed decisions.
So transparency and informed consent even for medical devices.
Absolutely, patients have the right to know about the potential risks and benefits so they can make choices that are right for them.
I really appreciate how ISO standards prioritize patient empowerment and informed decision-making throughout the healthcare journey. Now I want to shift back to quality management systems, or QMS. Specifically within healthcare organizations, we talked about QMS being like an operating system for smooth operations. Can you give me a picture of what that actually looks like in a real hospital?
Sure, let's imagine a hospital that successfully implemented a QMS based on ISO 7101.2023. One of the first things you'd notice is that they have really well-defined processes and procedures for pretty much everything they do.
So it's not about individuals just doing things their own way. There's an established system for how things get done.
Exactly. There would be documented procedures for everything. Admitting patients, administering medications, handling lab samples, performing surgeries, responding to emergencies. Even routine tasks like cleaning equipment would have standardized procedures.
So every task, every process has clear instructions that everyone follows to ensure consistency.
Right, and these procedures aren't just made up. They're based on best practices, evidence-based guidelines, and the organization's own experience and data.
So standardizing care to make sure everyone's meeting the same high standards.
Precisely. And that consistency is key for minimizing errors and improving safety.
But what about the expertise of healthcare professionals? Don't they need to be able to adapt to different situations and patient needs?
Absolutely. The procedures provide a framework, but they're not meant to be rigid. Healthcare professionals still use their clinical judgment and tailor their approach to each patient.
So finding that balance between standardization and personalized care.
Exactly. The goal is a system that provides structure and consistency, while also allowing for flexibility and individual attention.
I'm really starting to understand the power of a good QMS. But setting up and maintaining that system sounds like a huge task.
It definitely requires commitment from the entire organization, but the benefits are worth it.
Okay, convince me, what are some of the biggest benefits?
Well, we've touched on a few: improved patient safety, fewer errors, increased efficiency, greater pace of satisfaction. But there's more. A strong QMS also leads to better communication and teamwork.
Because everyone's on the same page working from that same playbook?
Exactly. When everyone understands the processes, it reduces confusion and miscommunication, which we know are major factors in healthcare errors. A QMS also creates a culture of continuous improvement, where everyone is encouraged to find ways to do things better.
So it's not about settling, it's about always striving for excellence.
That's it, and that can be really motivating for staff. It can lead to more job satisfaction and a stronger sense of purpose, knowing they're contributing to a culture of quality.
That makes sense, and those benefits extend to both patients and providers.
It's a win-win, and let's not forget the benefits to the organization itself. A strong QMS can boost their reputation, improve their finances, even make them more attractive to potential employees and partners.
So it's not just about doing the right thing, it's good business too.
Absolutely. Quality and safety are ethical and smart strategies.
This has been so insightful. I'm feeling really optimistic about the future of healthcare. But let's be realistic. Implementing these standards and building a QMS can be really challenging. What are some of the hurdles?
You're right, it's not always easy. One common challenge is resistance to change. People get used to doing things a certain way, and a new system means a big shift in mindset and practices.
So overcoming that inertia and getting everyone on board.
Exactly, and that takes strong leadership, clear communication, and ongoing training and support for staff. Another challenge is the sheer amount of documentation required.
Ah, yes, the paperwork, I can imagine that could be overwhelming, especially for smaller organizations.
It can be a lot to handle, but luckily there are tools and technologies that can help.
You mean electronic quality management systems?
Exactly, they can automate a lot of the tasks. Documentation record-keeping reporting makes the whole process more efficient.
That's good to know. Technology can really make a difference. But even with the right tools and a dedicated team, there are going to be challenges along the way. How do organizations know they're on the right track? How do they measure their progress and make sure their QMS is working?
That's where monitoring and measurement come in. ISO standards emphasize collecting and analyzing data to track performance, identify areas for improvement, and demonstrate that the QMS is effective.
So it's not just set it and forget it. You're constantly evaluating and refining the system.
Exactly. Organizations need to establish key performance indicators, or KPIs, that align with their quality objectives.
What kind of things would those KPIs measure?
They could track things like patient satisfaction rates, the number of adverse events, medication error rates, how long it takes to process lab results, even staff adherence to hand hygiene protocols.
So measuring things that really matter, things that reflect the quality and safety of care.
That's it. And then using that data to make informed decisions about improvement.
So it's a continuous cycle plan, do, check, act, always striving for better.
Precisely, that cycle is essential for making sure the QMS stays relevant and effective and keeps up with the changing needs of patients and the healthcare landscape.
This is making me so excited about the potential of ISO standards to really change healthcare for the better. But as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to come back to the human element. We've talked about patient engagement. But what about the role of healthcare professionals in all of this? How do ISO standards empower and support them in their work?
Yeah, that's a really important point. ISO standards recognize that healthcare professionals are the ones on the front lines. They're the ones delivering that quality care. These standards aren't about telling them what to do or replacing their judgment. It's about giving them the tools and the support they need to be as good as they can be.
So it's about supporting them, not dictating to them, right? Creating an environment where they can really thrive.
Exactly. One way ISO standards do this is by encouraging open communication and collaboration. Organizations are encouraged to create workplaces where healthcare professionals feel comfortable speaking up, sharing their concerns, and being a part of making things better.
Makes sense. When people feel valued and heard, they're more likely to be engaged and really invested in their work.
Absolutely. And that leads to better care because when healthcare professionals feel empowered, they're more committed to delivering that high quality care. And ISO standards go even further by emphasizing training and competence development.
So it's not just about having the right procedures, it's making sure staff have the knowledge and skills to actually implement them.
Exactly. ISO standards encourage organizations to invest in ongoing training and education, keeping staff up to date on best practices and new developments in healthcare.
Which is so important in a field that's constantly changing like healthcare.
It is, and it's not just about the quality of care, it's also about showing staff that they're valued, which can lead to higher job satisfaction and people staying in their roles longer.
This has been such an incredible journey exploring ISO standards in healthcare. We've covered so much from the basics of quality management systems to the global impact of these standards. And it's clear that they're not just about checking boxes or managing risks. They're about building a healthcare system that's truly patient-centered, focused on safety, and constantly striving to improve as we wrap up our deep dive. I'm curious about your thoughts on the bigger picture, beyond the direct benefits to patients and organizations. How do you see ISO standards shaping the future of healthcare globally?
That's a great question to think about. I think one of the most significant impacts is the potential to harmonize healthcare practices around the world. As more and more countries adopt these standards, we're moving toward a more consistent approach to quality and safety, no matter where you go.
So it's like creating a universal language for quality healthcare.
That's a great way to put it, and this harmonization opens up some really exciting possibilities. For example, it makes it easier to share best practices and knowledge between different healthcare systems.
So instead of each country having to figure everything out on their own, they can learn from each other's successes and mistakes.
Exactly. And this also has implications for medical tourism. As standards become more aligned globally, patients can have more confidence in the quality of care they'll receive, even if they travel to another country for treatment.
Which is a huge deal for people seeking specialized care outside their home countries.
It is, and we can't forget about the impact on medical device manufacturers. As standards become more harmonized, it's easier to get devices approved and marketed in different countries, which ultimately benefits patients everywhere.
So it streamlines innovation and helps those life-saving technologies reach the people who need them faster.
Exactly. It breaks down barriers and fosters a more competitive global market for medical devices, which is good for everyone.
It's amazing to think about the ripple effects of these standards on a global scale. And it's not just about the present ISO standards are playing a key role in shaping the future of healthcare. As technology advances and brings new treatless diagnostic tools and models of care, it's a really exciting time for innovation.
It is, but of course, these advancements also come with new challenges for ensuring quality and safety, and that's where ISO standards are proving to be so adaptable. They're evolving to meet these new challenges head on.
So they're not about holding things back. They're about anticipating and adapting to the future of healthcare.
Exactly. Take, for example, the increasing importance of data security and privacy, especially with electronic health records and other digital health technologies. New ISO standards are being developed specifically to address how organizations can protect sensitive data and ensure these technologies are used responsibly.
That's so important as healthcare relies more and more on data, and technology patients need to trust that their information is being handled safely and securely.
Absolutely, that trust is essential for successfully integrating these new technologies into healthcare, and ISO standards are helping to build that foundation of trust.
What we've learned today has totally changed how I think about ISO standards. They're not just about compliance, they're about laying the groundwork for innovation and progress in healthcare while always keeping patient safety and well-being at the forefront.
I couldn't agree more. They represent a global commitment to excellence in healthcare, empowering patients, providers, and organizations to work together toward that shared goal.
So as we wrap up our deep dive, what's the next step for our listeners? How can they take what they've learned and apply it to their own lives or work?
Here's a question for everyone to think about. As healthcare keeps evolving at this incredible pace, how can we use the flexibility of ISO standards to ensure that healthcare quality and safety keep improving? Think about the ethics of artificial intelligence and data-driven healthcare. How do ISO standards fit into that evolving landscape? These are complex questions that need ongoing discussion and collaboration.
That's a great challenge to leave our listeners with. That This has just scratched the surface. I encourage everyone to keep learning about these standards and think about how they can be used to shape the future of healthcare, because ultimately it's about all of us working together to create a healthcare system that truly puts patients first. Thanks for joining us on this fascinating exploration.